The vast chamber of the Galactic Council thronged with barely contained energy. Hundreds of alien species, each more bizarre than the last, filled the tiered seats. Their chittering, wobbling, and rumbling created a cacophony that seemed to make the very air vibrate. At the center of it all stood a lone human woman, her stance defiant despite the chains that bound her wrists. Captain Sarah Chen of the Earth Expeditionary Force didn't flinch as the Arch-Counselor, a towering six-armed being with iridescent scales, brought down its gavel. The resounding boom silenced the chamber instantly. Captain Sarah Chen of Earth, the Arch-Counselor's voice reverberated through the room, each word dripping with disdain. You stand accused of gross violations of galactic law, reckless endangerment of civilian populations, and willful disregard for the chain of command. Sarah's jaw clenched, but she remained silent. She knew this was a farce, a show trial to discredit humanity's rising influence in galactic affairs. The Arch-Counselor continued, its multifaceted eyes glinting with malice. Your actions during the Orion conflict, while ultimately successful in repelling the swarm, caused unacceptable collateral damage. The destruction of the Centauri wormhole network has set back galactic travel by decades. With all due respect, Arch-Counselor, Sarah's voice rang out, clear and unwavering. The swarm would have overrun our defenses within hours if we hadn't collapsed the wormhole network. Millions of lives were saved by that decision. A ripple of murmurs swept through the chamber. Sarah could see a few nods of agreement, but they were quickly stifled by glares from the more influential council members. The Arch-Counselor's scales flickered with annoyance. Your justifications are irrelevant, human. The council has reached its decision. It paused for dramatic effect, its gaze sweeping the chamber before settling back on Sarah. You are hereby stripped of your rank and sentenced to exile on the prison world of Nemesis. A collective gasp echoed through the chamber. Even among the hardened diplomats and politicians of the Galactic Council, the name Nemesis evoked fear. It was a death sentence, plain and simple. Sarah felt her blood run cold, but she refused to show weakness. Nemesis. That's a bit excessive for saving the galaxy, don't you think? The Arch-Counselor's mouth twisted into what might have been a smile on a less alien face. Your human humor does you no credit, Sarah Chen. Nemesis will serve as a fitting punishment for your crimes and a warning to the rest of your kind. Humanity must learn its place in the galactic order. As the guards moved to escort her away, Sarah's mind raced. Nemesis, a planet of perpetual storms, toxic atmosphere, and nightmarish predators. No one had ever returned from exile there. But then again, no human had ever been sent there before. The next few hours passed in a blur. Sarah was stripped of her uniform, given a basic survival kit, and unceremoniously shoved into a one-way transport pod. As the pod's hatch sealed with a hiss of finality, she caught a glimpse of a familiar face in the crowd, Admiral Zeo, her old mentor. The look of anguish on his face told Sarah everything she needed to know. This wasn't just about her, it was a power play against all of humanity. The pod rocketed away from the massive space station that housed the Galactic Council. Through the small viewport, Sarah watched as the glittering edifice grew smaller and smaller, eventually disappearing among the stars. She allowed herself a moment of despair, closing her eyes and taking a deep breath. But Captain Sarah Chen wasn't one to wallow in self-pity for long. Her eyes snapped open, a fierce determination burning in their depths. If the Alien Council thought this would break her, break humanity, they were in for a rude awakening. She turned her attention to the survival kit they'd given her. It was pitiful. A basic air filter, a week's worth of nutrient paste, a multi-tool, and a small energy pistol with a single charge. They clearly didn't expect her to last long. Joke's on them, Sarah muttered to herself as she began to methodically go through the kit, assessing each item. Humans have a nasty habit of surviving where we're not wanted. The journey to Nemesis took 3 days. Sarah used that time to prepare herself mentally and physically. She exercised in the confined space of the pod, ran through survival scenarios in her mind, and even managed to modify the air filter to be more efficient using parts from the pod's less essential systems. On the dawn of the fourth day, a violent shudder ran through the pod. Sarah strapped herself in just as the viewport filled with the roiling, storm-racked atmosphere of Nemesis. The pod's heat shield glowed white-hot as it plunged through the thick, toxic clouds. Turbulence rattled Sarah's teeth, and warning alarms blared as the pod's systems were pushed to their limits. With a bone-jarring impact, the pod slammed into the surface of Nemesis. Emergency shock absorbers depleted themselves in an instant, leaving Sarah bruised but alive. As the dust settled, the pod's hatch blew open automatically, letting in the first breath of Nemesis's hostile air. Sarah quickly affixed the air filter over her nose and mouth before the toxic atmosphere could overwhelm her. She grabbed the survival kit and stepped out onto the alien world that was meant to be her tomb. The landscape that greeted her was like something out of a fever dream. The sky roiled with angry, greenish-black clouds, occasionally split by arcs of crimson lightning. The ground beneath her feet was a mosaic of sharp, obsidian-like rock and patches of sickly, phosphorescent lichen. In the distance, she could see twisted spires of rock jutting into the sky, their surfaces crawling with what looked unsettlingly like movement. A hot, sulphurous wind whipped at Sarah's hair, carrying with it the screeches and howls of unseen creatures. She squared her shoulders, her grip tightening on the pathetic energy pistol they'd given her. "Welcome to Nemesis," she said to herself, a grim smile playing on her lips. "Let's see what you've got." As Sarah took her first steps on this alien hell, she couldn't help but think of Earth, of the people she'd left behind. Admiral Zoe's face flashed in her mind again. She knew he wouldn't have given up on her. Even now, he was probably fighting against her sentence, looking for a way to bring her back. But Sarah also knew she couldn't count on rescue. If she was going to survive, if she was going to find a way off this nightmare of a planet, she would have to do it herself. And in doing so, she would show the Galactic Council exactly what humanity was capable of. A distant roar echoed across the landscape, sending a shiver down Sarah's spine. Whatever made that sound was big, and it was coming closer. Sarah checked her pistol one last time and started moving towards the relative shelter of the twisted rock formations. As she picked her way across the treacherous terrain, Sarah's mind was already racing, formulating plans, analyzing her surroundings. The Council had sent her here to die, but they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd sent a human. And humans, as the galaxy was about to learn, don't go down without one hell of a fight. The first week on Nemesis was a brutal test of Sarah Chen's will to survive. Each day brought new challenges, each night new terrors. The planet seemed designed to break her, body and spirit. Sarah had quickly discovered that the twisted rock formations were her best chance for shelter. The spires, which she'd taken to calling thorns, provided some protection from the constant acid rain and the predators that roamed the plains. But even these sanctuaries were not without their dangers. On her third day, while exploring one of the larger thorns, Sarah had nearly lost her life to a colony of what she could only describe as carnivorous moss. The innocent-looking growth had suddenly come alive, reaching for her with tendrils that secreted a powerful paralytic. Only her quick reflexes and the makeshift flamethrower she'd cobbled together from her pod's wreckage had saved her. Now, as she huddled in a small cave high up one of the thorns, Sarah took stock of her situation. Her nutrient paste was almost gone, and the air filter was struggling against Nemesis's corrosive atmosphere. She needed to find a sustainable food source and a better way to purify the air, or her exile would be very short indeed. "Come on, Chen," she muttered to herself, her voice raspy from disuse. "You didn't survive the swarm and piss off the entire Galactic Council just to die on this rock." A distant roar echoed across the landscape, reminding Sarah of the other pressing issue, the apex predator she'd glimpsed but hadn't yet fully encountered. Whatever it was big, fast, and seemed to be territorial about the area where she'd crashed. Sarah had dubbed the creature Nightmare, after its haunting cry and the fleeting glimpses she caught of its massive, shadowy form. So far, she'd managed to avoid a direct confrontation, but she knew it was only a matter of time. With a grunt of effort, Sarah pulled herself to her feet. Sitting around wasn't going to solve anything. She needed to explore, to push further into the hostile terrain of Nemesis and uncover its secrets. Carefully, she made her way down the thorn, using the natural ridges and crevices as handholds. Her boots, already falling apart from the corrosive environment, struggled to find purchase on the slick surface. As she reached the ground, a flicker of movement caught her eye. Sarah froze, her hand instinctively going to the energy pistol at her hip. She'd long since used its single charge, but she'd managed to rig it into a crude taser. Not powerful enough to take down anything big, but it had saved her from the smaller predators more than once. The movement came again, and this time Sarah saw its source. It was a small creature, no bigger than a cat, with 6 legs and a body covered in iridescent scales. Its head swiveled towards her, revealing multifaceted eyes that glimmered with an unsettling intelligence. Sarah held her breath. This was the first animal she'd seen on Nemesis that hadn't immediately tried to kill her. The creature chittered softly, taking a hesitant step towards her. "Hey there, little guy," Sarah said softly, crouching down to appear less threatening. "You're a curious one, aren't you?" The creature tilted its head, seeming to consider her words. Then, with startling speed, it darted forward. Sarah tensed, ready to defend herself, but the creature stopped just short of her, its nose twitching as it sniffed at her boot. A wild idea struck Sarah. If this animal could survive on Nemesis, maybe it could lead her to safe food and water. It was a long shot, but on this hellish planet, long shots were all she had. "All right, buddy," Sarah said, slowly reaching into her pack. "Let's see if we can make a deal." She pulled out her last strip of nutrient paste, tasteless, but apparently appealing to the creature, whose eyes widened at the sight. Sarah broke off a small piece and tossed it to the animal, who snatched it out of the air with surprising dexterity. "There's more where that came from," Sarah said, waving the rest of the strip. "But you've got to show me where you get your food and water. Deal?" As if in response, the creature chittered again and began to move away, stopping to look back at Sarah expectantly. "I'll take that as a yes," Sarah muttered, following her newfound guide. The creature led her on a winding path through the forest of thorns. Several times, it stopped and chattered urgently, warning Sarah of hidden dangers, patches of the carnivorous moss, deep crevices that exhaled toxic fumes, and once, the fresh tracks of nightmare. Finally, after what felt like hours of careful navigation, the thorns opened up into a small clearing. At its center was a pool of liquid that glowed with a soft purple light. Around the pool grew clusters of bulbous, pulsating plants. The creature scampered up to one of the plants and nimbly plucked a small, fruit-like growth from its surface. It popped the fruit into its mouth, chewing contentedly. Sarah approached cautiously, her scientific mind racing. The pool's glow suggested bioluminescent bacteria, which could mean the water was safe to drink. The plants, if edible, could be a sustainable food source. "You've done good, little guy," Sarah said, tossing the rest of the nutrient paste to her guide. The creature caught it happily and scurried off into the underbrush. Sarah knelt by the pool, running her multi-tool sensor over the liquid. To her amazement, it registered as not just safe, but rich in minerals and free of the toxic elements that permeated most of Nemesis' environment. She cupped her hands and brought the glowing water to her lips. It tasted sweet and left a tingling sensation on her tongue. Almost immediately, she felt a surge of energy course through her body. "Oh, if the council could see me now," Sarah laughed, the sound echoing strangely in the quiet clearing. Her laughter died abruptly as a familiar roar split the air, much closer this time. Sarah spun around, her heart pounding. At the edge of the clearing, emerging from between 2 massive thorns, was Nightmare. In the purple glow of the pool, Sarah got her first clear look at the apex predator of Nemesis. It was enormous, easily the size of an earth elephant, with a body that seemed to shimmer and shift, blending with the shadows around it. 6 powerful legs ended in wickedly curved claws, and its elongated head was dominated by rows of gleaming teeth and 4 eyes that burned with a cold, alien intelligence. Sarah's mind raced, calculating her odds. The energy pistol was useless against something this big. The thorns were too far to reach before the creature could overtake her. Her only advantage was the pool. If she could make it to the other side, maybe she could lose Nightmare in the dense forest of thorns. But before she could move, something unexpected happened. The small 6-legged creature that had guided her to the clearings suddenly darted out from its hiding place. It ran straight at Nightmare, chittering loudly. To Sarah's astonishment, Nightmare stopped its advance. It lowered its massive head, regarding the smaller creature with what almost looked like affection. The little guide clambered up Nightmare's leg and perched on its back, still chattering away. Sarah stood frozen, barely daring to breathe. Nightmare's 4 eyes locked onto her, and she felt the weight of its alien gaze. There was curiosity there, and intelligence far beyond what she'd expected. In that moment, Sarah realized that everything she thought she knew about Nemesis was wrong. This wasn't just a hostile environment to be conquered. It was a complex ecosystem, with relationships and intelligence she was only beginning to understand. And if she was going to survive, if she was going to thrive and eventually escape this planet, she would need to become a part of that ecosystem. Slowly, carefully, Sarah raised her empty hands, palms out. "Okay, big guy," she said softly. "Let's start over. I'm Sarah, and I think we might have a lot to learn from each other." Nightmare regarded her for a long moment. Then, to Sarah's amazement, it lowered itself to the ground, the little guide still perched on its back. As Sarah took a cautious step forward, she felt a spark of hope for the first time since arriving on Nemesis. The Galactic Council had sent her here to die, but instead, she might have found the key not just to survival, but to understanding this world in a way no one else ever had. The real adventure, Sarah realized, was just beginning. The days that followed Sarah's encounter with Nightmare marked a turning point in her exile on Nemesis. What had begun as a desperate struggle for survival evolved into something far more complex and fascinating. Sarah had taken to calling her smaller, 6-legged guide Scout, and true to its name, the creature proved invaluable in helping her navigate the dangers of Nemesis. Scout seemed to have an uncanny ability to sense threats before they became apparent, chittering warnings that Sarah quickly learned to heed. Nightmare, the massive predator that had initially terrified her, became an unlikely ally. Sarah had begun to call it Shadow, due to its ability to blend seamlessly with the darkness between the thorns. While still wild and unpredictable, Shadow seemed to have accepted Sarah's presence, even showing a degree of protectiveness towards her. On this particular day, Sarah was perched high on Shadow's back, Scout nestled comfortably beside her. They were traversing a part of Nemesis she hadn't yet explored, moving through a forest of crystalline structures that chimed eerily in the toxic wind. "Easy, big guy," Sarah murmured as Shadow navigated a particularly treacherous patch of ground. The crystalline forest floor was dotted with deep fissures that occasionally belched gouts of green flame. "Scout, any warnings?" Scout chittered softly, its multifaceted eyes scanning the surroundings. Sarah had learned to trust the little creature's instincts implicitly. When Scout was calm, it usually meant they were safe, or at least as safe as one could be on Nemesis. As they moved deeper into the crystal forest, Sarah's scientific curiosity kicked into high gear. The structures around them weren't just beautiful, they were impossibly complex, refracting the dim light of Nemesis's sun in ways that defied the laws of physics as she understood them. "This is incredible," Sarah breathed, her hand reaching out to touch one of the nearer crystals. As her fingers brushed its surface, the entire structure lit up with an inner fire, pulsing with colors she had no names for. "Scout, Shadow, are you seeing this?" Scout chirped excitedly, scampering down Shadow's leg to investigate the glowing crystal. Shadow rumbled low in its throat, a sound Sarah had come to associate with curiosity rather than threat. Suddenly, Scout's chipper turned urgent. The little creature darted back up Shadow's leg, tugging at Sarah's tattered sleeve with its teeth. "What is it, buddy?" Sarah asked, instantly alert. She'd learned early on that ignoring Scout's warnings was a quick way to end up dead on Nemesis. A tremor ran through the ground, causing the crystal formations to vibrate discordantly. The sound grew in intensity until it was almost painful, and Sarah clapped her hands over her ears. "Shadow, we need to move," she shouted over the din. The massive creature needed no further encouragement, breaking into a loping run that ate up the distance with startling speed. They burst out of the crystal forest just as the ground behind them erupted. A massive, worm-like creature emerged, its body segmented and covered in razor-sharp crystal protrusions. It let out a shriek that shattered several nearby formations. "Oh hell," Sarah muttered, her mind racing. This was a new threat, one she hadn't encountered before. She patted Shadow's flank. "Okay, big guy, let's see what you can do." Shadow needed no further encouragement. With a roar that shook the very air, it charged at the crystalline worm. Sarah clung to its back, her heart pounding as Shadow and the worm clashed in a fury of claws, teeth, and crystal shards. The battle was fierce but brief. Shadow's natural camouflage and lightning-fast reflexes proved too much for the worm. With a final, earth-shaking roar, Shadow clamped its jaws around the worm's midsection and wrenched, tearing the creature in two. As the dust settled, Sarah slid off Shadow's back, her legs shaky but her mind clear. She approached the fallen worm cautiously, Scout at her heels. "Easy, Scout," she murmured as the little creature hissed at the worm's twitching remains. "Let's see what we can learn from our new friend here." Sarah pulled out her multi-tool, using its scanner to analyze the worm's crystalline hide. The readings that came back made her eyes widen in surprise. This is incredible," she breathed. "The crystal isn't just a shell, it's part of the creature's biology. And these readings, Scout, Shadow, do you realize what this means?" She turned to her companions, excitement overriding her usual caution. These crystals could be the key to neutralizing the toxins in Nemesis's atmosphere. If I can figure out how to replicate this structure, I might be able to create a filtration system that would make long-term survival here possible. Shadow rumbled curiously, nosing at the worm's remains. Scout, sensing Sarah's excitement, scampered up to perch on her shoulder, chittering happily. As Sarah began to collect samples, her mind was already racing with possibilities. The Galactic Council had sent her to Nemesis as a death sentence, but they had unknowingly given her the opportunity of a lifetime. She was making discoveries that could revolutionize their understanding of alien biology and hostile environments. But more than that, Sarah realized, she was forging connections that defied everything she thought she knew about interspecies relationships. Scout and Shadow weren't just animals she had tamed. They were partners, allies in her survival and exploration of this harsh world. As the trio made their way back to the relative safety of their home base, a large thorn formation that Sarah had modified into a surprisingly comfortable shelter, Sarah felt a sense of purpose that she hadn't experienced since her days as a starship captain. "You know, guys," she said, patting Shadow's flank and scratching Scout behind its antenna, "I think it's time we stopped just surviving and started thriving. Nemesis threw its worst at us, and we're still standing. Now, let's see what else this planet has been hiding." That night, as Sarah worked on her makeshift lab equipment, synthesizing the first batch of crystal-based atmospheric filters, she allowed herself a small smile. The Galactic Council had hoped to break her, to make an example of humanity's recklessness. Instead, they had given her the chance to showcase humanity's greatest strengths: adaptability, curiosity, and the ability to forge unlikely alliances in the face of overwhelming odds. As she drifted off to sleep, Shadow curled protectively around her shelter and Scout nestled against her side, Sarah's last thought was of the look on the council's faces when she eventually returned, not broken, but triumphant, with the secrets of Nemesis and two incredible alien companions at her side. The exile had become an adventure, and Sarah Chen was just getting started. Months had passed since Sarah's arrival on Nemesis, though time seemed to flow differently on this hostile world. The perpetual storms and ever-shifting landscape made it difficult to track the passage of days, but Sarah's internal clock, honed by years of space travel, told her she'd been here for at least half a standard Earth year. In that time, she had transformed from a desperate survivor into a thriving explorer. Her shelter, once a crude hideout in a thorn formation, had evolved into a sophisticated base of operations. Crystal-based atmospheric filters, reverse-engineered from the remains of the worm creature, now purified the air around her camp. She'd even managed to cultivate some of the bioluminescent plants from the clearing, providing a sustainable food source. But Sarah's greatest achievements were the bonds she'd formed with Shadow and Scout. What had begun as an uneasy alliance had blossomed into a deep, almost telepathic connection. They moved as one unit now, exploring the furthest reaches of Nemesis with a confidence that would have seemed impossible in those first harrowing days. On this particular expedition, they were venturing into a region Sarah had dubbed the Labyrinth, a vast network of underground tunnels that honeycombed the planet's crust. The walls pulsed with veins of a strange metallic substance that seemed to react to their presence, glowing faintly as they passed. "Easy, Shadow," Sarah murmured as the massive creature squeezed through a particularly tight passage. Scout, perched on her shoulder, chittered nervously. "I know, buddy. Something feels different about this place." As they emerged into a larger cavern, Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The chamber was enormous, its ceiling lost in shadows high above. But it wasn't the size that stunned her, it was what filled the space. Stretching as far as she could see were row upon row of what could only be described as stasis pods. Each was roughly the size of a human, constructed of the same strange, pulsing metal that ran through the cave walls. "What in the world?" Sarah breathed, sliding off Shadow's back to approach the nearest pod. As she drew close, the surface of the pod shimmered and became transparent, revealing its occupant. Sarah stumbled back in shock. Inside the pod was a being unlike anything she'd ever encountered, not human, not like any of the alien species she knew from the Galactic Council, but something older, ancient. Its features were ethereal, almost luminous, with eyes that seemed to hold the depth of galaxies. "Scout, Shadow, are you seeing this?" Sarah whispered. Scout chittered softly, its usual exuberance subdued by the gravity of their discovery. Shadow rumbled low in its throat, eyes darting warily around the chamber. Sarah's mind raced. This wasn't just a random feature of Nemesis, this was deliberate. A vault of some kind, housing beings of unimaginable age and likely power. But why here? Why on this hellish world that the Galactic Council used as a prison planet? As if in response to her unspoken questions, the metallic veins in the walls pulsed brighter. A holographic interface flickered to life in front of her, displaying symbols in a language she'd never seen before. "Oh, no you don't," Sarah muttered, pulling out her multi-tool. She'd modified it extensively during her time on Nemesis, incorporating elements of the crystal technology she'd discovered. "Let's see if we can make sense of this." For hours, Sarah worked feverishly, her fingers flying over the holographic interface as she attempted to decipher its secrets. Scout and Shadow kept watch, their senses attuned to any potential threats in this strange new environment. Finally, with a triumphant cry, Sarah cracked the code. The holographic display shifted, the alien symbols resolving into a language she could understand. "The progenitors," Sarah read aloud, her voice echoing in the vast chamber. "Architects of galaxies, shapers of worlds. Guys, I think we've just stumbled onto something big, really big." As Sarah delved deeper into the records, an incredible story began to unfold. The beings in the stasis pods, The progenitors were an ancient race that had seeded life throughout the galaxy. They had created the conditions for evolution on countless worlds, including Earth. But they had also created Nemesis as a vault, a place to preserve themselves against some great calamity that had befallen their civilization. The hostile environment, Sarah realized, it's not natural. It's a defense mechanism designed to protect this vault from discovery or intrusion. She turned to her companions, her eyes wide with the implications of their discovery. Don't you see? Nemesis isn't a prison planet, it's a sanctuary. The most important sanctuary in the galaxy. But as the full weight of this revelation settled on her, Sarah's excitement gave way to a cold dread. If she had managed to uncover this secret, others could too. And if the wrong people or aliens got their hands on the knowledge and power of the progenitors, the consequences could be catastrophic. "We need to get out of here," Sarah said urgently, already moving towards Shadow. "We need to warn the Council, warn everyone. The whole balance of power in the galaxy could be at stake." As they raced back through the tunnels of the labyrinth, Sarah's mind was already formulating a plan. She would need to find a way off Nemesis to reach the Galactic Council. But more than that, she would need to convince them of the truth, a truth that would shake the very foundations of their society. The exile who had been sent to die on a hostile world now held the fate of the galaxy in her hands. And as they emerged from the tunnels into the stormy landscape of Nemesis, Sarah Chen knew that her greatest challenge was only just beginning. Shadow roared, as if in agreement with her unspoken thoughts, and Scout chittered excitedly from its perch on her shoulder. Together, this unlikely trio, a human, an apex predator, and a small six-legged alien, were about to change the course of galactic history. As they raced across the hostile terrain of Nemesis, Sarah allowed herself a grim smile. The Galactic Council had no idea what was coming their way. It was time to show them exactly what humanity and its alien allies were capable of. The stormy skies of Nemesis crackled with energy as Sarah, Shadow, and Scout made their way across the treacherous landscape. Their destination, the crash site of Sarah's original pod. It had been months since she'd last visited the twisted wreckage, having salvaged what she could in those first desperate days of survival. But now, with the knowledge of the progenitors burning in her mind, Sarah saw the pod with new eyes. It wasn't just a reminder of her exile, it was her ticket off this planet and back to the Galactic Council. "All right, team," Sarah said as they approached the battered hull. "We've got work to do." Over the next several days, Sarah worked tirelessly to repair the pod. She cannibalized parts from her makeshift base, incorporated crystalline technology she developed, and even used some of Shadow's shed scales to reinforce the hull against Nemesis's corrosive atmosphere. Scout proved invaluable, its small size allowing it to reach into tight spaces to make delicate adjustments. Even Shadow contributed, using its immense strength to move heavy components and standing guard against the planet's many dangers. As Sarah worked, she couldn't help but reflect on the irony of her situation. The very skills that had led to her exile, her ability to think outside the box, to make unconventional decisions, were now what might save not just her life, but potentially the entire galaxy. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of work, the pod hummed to life. Its systems were far from perfect, cobbled together from disparate technologies, but Sarah was confident it would get them off-planet. There was just one problem. "It's not big enough for all of us," Sarah said, her heart heavy as she looked at her alien companions. "The life support system can barely handle one passenger, let alone, well, whatever you two are." Scout chittered sadly, nuzzling against Sarah's cheek. Shadow let out a low, mournful rumble that Sarah felt in her bones. "No," Sarah said firmly, surprising even herself with the vehemence in her voice. "No, I'm not leaving you behind. You're not just allies anymore, you're family. We started this together, and by all that's holy, we're going to finish it together." With renewed determination, Sarah turned back to the pod. "If this hunk of junk won't fit all of us, then we'll just have to think bigger." Over the next week, Sarah and her companions scoured Nemesis for anything that could be used to expand the pod. They delved into the crystal forests, harvested more of the living metal from the labyrinth, and even managed to salvage parts from other crashed pods they discovered, grim reminders of those who hadn't survived their exile. The result was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Part escape pod, part living organism, the vessel pulsed with the combined life force of Nemesis itself. Its hull was a patchwork of crystalline structures and living metal, powered by the same bioluminescent energy that Sarah had first discovered in that life-saving pool so long ago. As they made their final preparations for launch, Sarah felt a pang of something unexpected: regret. Despite all its dangers, Nemesis had become more than just a prison. It had been a teacher, a challenge, and ultimately a home. "We'll come back," she promised, running her hand along the nearest formed formation. "Once we've warned the Council, once we've secured the progenitors, we'll come back and make sure Nemesis is protected." With a deep breath, Sarah climbed into the makeshift cockpit of their bizarre vessel. Shadow curled around the base, its massive body serving as both additional protection and a living engine. Scout took its place on Sarah's shoulder, its multifaceted eyes fixed on the stormy sky above. "Well, guys," Sarah said, her hands dancing over the hybrid controls, "let's go crash a council meeting." With a roar that shook the very foundations of Nemesis, their vessel lifted off. It fought against the planet's gravity, against the howling winds and corrosive storms. For a heart-stopping moment, Sarah feared they wouldn't break free. But then, with a final surge of power, they punched through Nemesis's atmosphere and into the cold silence of space. Sarah let out a whoop of triumph, Scout chittering excitedly beside her. Even Shadow rumbled in satisfaction, its massive form vibrating through the ship. As the hostile beauty of Nemesis proceeded behind them, Sarah set a course for the Galactic Council's headquarters. The journey would be long and fraught with danger. Their cobbled-together ship was an unknown factor, and Sarah had no doubt that once they entered civilized space, they would be met with fear and hostility. But as she looked at her unlikely companions, as she felt the weight of the progenitor's secret, Sarah knew that they were equal to the challenge. The Galactic Council had sent her to Nemesis to die, to be forgotten. Instead, she was returning with knowledge that would shake the very foundations of their society. "Hold tight, guys," Sarah said, a fierce grin spreading across her face. "We're about to rewrite galactic history." As their ship accelerated towards the distant stars, Sarah Chen, exiled captain, survivor of Nemesis, and now protector of an ancient secret, felt a thrill of anticipation. The real adventure, it seemed, was only just beginning. The journey back to the Galactic Council headquarters was a harrowing odyssey. Sarah's makeshift ship, while a marvel of improvised engineering, was not designed for long-distance space travel. They had to make frequent stops at remote outposts and abandoned space stations to scavenge for supplies and make repairs. Each stop brought its own dangers. Sarah's face was still known throughout the galaxy as an exile and a criminal. More than once, they had to make hasty retreats from bounty hunters and overzealous law enforcement officials. Shadow's intimidating presence and Scout's uncanny ability to sabotage pursuit ships proved invaluable during these encounters. But it was the reaction to Shadow and Scout that truly opened Sarah's eyes to the gravity of their mission. The sight of a human working in harmony with two clearly intelligent alien species unknown to the wider galactic community, caused a stir wherever they went. Rumors began to spread, whispers of a rogue human who had tamed the terrors of Nemesis. As they approached the massive space station that housed the Galactic Council, Sarah knew their arrival wouldn't go unnoticed. Sure enough, as soon as they entered the system, they were surrounded by a fleet of Council peacekeeping vessels. "Unidentified vessel," a stern voice crackled over the comm system, "You are in restricted space. Power down your engines and prepare to be boarded." Sarah took a deep breath, exchanging glances with Scout and feeling Shadow's reassuring rumble through the ship's hull. "This is Captain Sarah Chen of Earth," she responded, her voice steady. I'm here to address the Galactic Council on a matter of utmost importance, and I suggest you think very carefully before trying to board this ship." There was a long pause, then, "Captain Chen, but you were exiled to Nemesis. How?" "That's a long story," Sarah said, allowing a hint of steel to enter her voice. "One I'll be happy to share with the full council. Now, are you going to escort us in, or do we have to make an entrance?" Minutes later, the bizarre vessel was docking at the station, surrounded by a mix of heavily armed guards and curious onlookers. As the airlock cycled open, Sarah stepped out, flanked by Shadow and Scout. The assembled crowd gasped, some backing away in fear, others leaning in with undisguised fascination. Admiral Zhao, Sarah's old mentor, pushed his way through the crowd. His eyes widened as he took in the sight of his former protégée and her alien companions. "Sarah, is it really you?" Sarah smiled, feeling a lump form in her throat. "Hello, Admiral. Sorry I'm late for the debriefing." Before Zhao could respond, the Arch-Counselor's voice boomed across the docking bay. "What is the meaning of this? Guards, seize the exile and her creatures." "I wouldn't do that if I were you," Sarah called out, her hand resting on Shadow's flank. The massive predator growled low in its throat, causing nearby guards to take an involuntary step back. "We're here peacefully, but we will defend ourselves if necessary. And trust me, you don't want to see what Shadow and Scout can do when they're not feeling friendly." The Arch-Counselor's multiple eyes narrowed. "You dare threaten the Council? After your crimes, after we showed you mercy by merely exiling you?" Sarah laughed, the sound echoing around the suddenly silent docking bay. "Mercy? You sent me to die on a hell planet. But instead of killing me, Nemesis taught me. It showed me secrets that will change everything we think we know about the galaxy." She fixed the Arch-Counselor with a steely gaze. "You're going to want to hear what I have to say. All of you are." Over the next hours, in a packed council chamber, Sarah laid out everything she had discovered. She told them about the progenitors, about Nemesis's true nature as a vault and sanctuary. She explained how humanity's adaptability and willingness to form unconventional alliances had allowed her not just to survive, but to thrive in an environment designed to be lethal to all known life forms. As she spoke, she could see the shock and disbelief on the faces of the council members slowly give way to awe, and in some cases, fear. The implications of her discoveries were staggering, threatening to upend the entire balance of power in the galaxy. "The progenitors created us all," Sarah concluded, her voice ringing out in the hushed chamber. "Human, Celian, Cayenne, we're all their children. And now they need our help. Nemesis isn't a prison, it's a cradle, protecting the future of all galactic life. We have a responsibility to protect it, to understand it, and maybe someday to wake the progenitors and learn from them." The silence that followed her words was deafening. Then, slowly, Admiral Zhao stood up. "I move that all charges against Captain Sarah Chen be immediately dropped," he said, his voice firm. "Furthermore, I propose that she be reinstated with full rank and be placed in charge of a joint task force to study and protect Nemesis." The chamber erupted in a cacophony of voices, some in support, others in outrage. The Arch-Counselor struggled to maintain order, its multiple limbs waving for silence. In the midst of the chaos, Sarah felt a gentle touch on her arm. She looked down to see Scout gazing up at her, its multifaceted eyes seeming to sparkle with pride. Shadow rumbled contentedly, its massive form a comforting presence at her back. "We did it, guys," Sarah murmured, a smile tugging at her lips. "We really did it." As the debate raged on around them, Sarah knew that this was just the beginning. There would be challenges ahead, political battles, scientific mysteries, and the monumental task of preparing the galaxy for the possible awakening of the progenitors. But looking at her unlikely family, a small, six-legged alien with an uncanny intellect, and a shape-shifting predator with a heart as big as its teeth, Sarah felt ready for anything the universe might throw at her. The Galactic Council had sent her to Nemesis to die. Instead, she had returned with a key to the galaxy's future and a powerful lesson about the strength of humanity. In the face of impossible odds, humans didn't just survive. They adapted, they formed bonds, and they thrived. As the Council finally called for a vote on Admiral Zeo's proposal, Sarah stood tall, ready to face whatever came next. The exile had become a hero, the prison planet a sanctuary, and the condemned criminal a savior of galactic proportions. Sarah Chen, once exiled and forgotten, now stood at the threshold of a new era for all galactic life, and she couldn't wait to see what adventures awaited her and her extraordinary companions in the vast, mysterious universe that stretched out before them. The end, or perhaps just the beginning.